It's a work of fiction that was written just for fun. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you are. It's always interesting to see how far these stories can go. People who lived in the hollows and ridges of Stone County, Arkansas, in the Ozark Mountains in the summer of 1959 noticed a strange stillness. Silence was always there with them. That season, though, felt different. It was wet outside, and even the cicadas seemed to sing with less conviction, as if they were being told what to say. Nature was afraid of something that couldn't be seen. On June 17, 1959, a man named Dalton Merriweather stopped at a general store in the unincorporated community of 56. At the time, 56 was made up of a few buildings squished together along a dirt road that wound through the highlands. The store ledger kept by the Stone County Historical Society shows that Merriweather bought things like rope, kerosene, canned beans, and salt pork. In his personal records, the owner, Virgil Kendrick, wrote that a stranger asked where he could stay and said he was doing geological surveys for a university. Merriweather was 34 years old and a graduate student at the University of Missouri. He was researching karst landscapes and underground water systems. His research was mostly about the huge cave networks that cross the Ozark Plateau. Specifically, he looked into how old sinkholes and natural wells formed in the area's unique limestone bedrock. Records from his university show that he had a small grant to document. In the summer, unmapped geological features can be found in remote parts of northern Arkansas. Merriweather disappeared sometime between late June and early July of that year. What makes his case especially interesting is not just his disappearance, but also the papers he left behind, and how they were found almost a decade later. In 1959, the Ozarks were still mostly cut off from the fast-paced modernization going on in American cities. A lot of families in the highlands. People in those areas lived a lot like their grandparents did. They lived on small farms cut into the sides of hills, got their water from springs and wells, and were very tired of people from other places. The roads were bad, the phone service was spotty, and the closest police station was often hours away by car over dangerous mountain paths. Merriweather had planned to stay with the Varnell family, a local family who lived on a homestead about 8 miles northeast of 56 and could only be reached by an old logging road. According to county tax records, the Varnell property had a small house built in the early 1920s on 120 acres of heavily wooded land. The patriarch, Hiram Varnell, his wife Opaline, and Hiram's younger brother Garnet lived in a fairly remote area. They only went into town about once a month to get supplies. Hiram Varnell, who was born in 1901, got the land from his father and took care of it by farming, living off the land, and sometimes selling timber. People from the area. People who knew him well said he was polite but not friendly, and that the harsh realities of mountain life had shaped him. 7 years his junior, Opaline, married him. She came from a family in nearby Ozarks County. Garnet Varnell was born in 1915 and had what were called developmental delays at the time. He lived with his brother and sister-in-law and helped them with farm work. There wasn't a big deal when Merriweather didn't come back to the university by August. Graduate students often do longer research projects in the field when they found sites that look promising. People didn't start to ask questions until September, when the department secretary tried to get him reimbursed for his research costs but couldn't find him. A letter sent to the people who live in Varnell with the address 56 marked General Delivery was not answered. At the beginning of October 1959, a county deputy named Foster Calloway went to the Varnell property to look for the missing researcher. His official report that was turned in to the Stone County Sheriff's Department and then put in the state's records, Calloway found the homestead to be in what looked like good shape. Hiram Varnell confirmed that Merriweather had indeed stayed with them for a few weeks, using their home as a base to go into the nearby forest every day to take pictures of geological features. Varnell said that Merriweather left early on July 2nd, saying that he was moving his research to a different area and would not be coming back. In the deputy's report, it was written that Varnell gave this information easily and without seeming to be trying to avoid it. When asked if Merriweather had left any things behind, Varnell said that the researcher had taken everything. The deputy wrote down that there was no reason to suspect foul play. He only said that the Ozark wilderness was dangerous and that researchers sometimes got hurt by natural disasters. The case was reported as a missing person, and since the family didn't ask for more help, it slowly fell out of the public eye. What wasn't in the deputy's report? Because he didn't have a reason to write it down, he left out some details that would become important later. In 1956, a neighbor named Rutherford Pascoe, who lived 3 miles down the valley, told other people that he had heard noises coming from the direction of the Varnell property in late June. He thought the sounds he heard were someone calling out, but he wasn't sure because they were so far away and in the thick forest. At the time, he didn't think much of it because he thought it was just the Varnell family working their land. The story. That could have been the end. If things didn't happen in 1968, one more person would have gone missing in the Ozarks' vast wilderness. In that year, the U.S. Forest Service started a full survey of all federally owned lands in the area. This was done to look at the timber resources and find places where recreation could be developed. The remains of the Varnell homestead were found by 2 forestry technicians who were doing a survey grid pattern through unincorporated areas. The property had been left empty. In line with, the forestry team looked at county records and found that Hiram Varnell had died in 1964. The property then went to distant relatives who didn't want to take care of it. The house was empty and was slowly falling apart from weather and lack of care. The forestry workers went inside to take a quick look because they were interested in the building and wanted to make sure that no squatters had moved in. They found a leather bag with a field in it under a loose floorboard in what used to be a small bedroom. Several letters, a notebook, and a set of topographical maps with notes written on them. The materials seemed to have been hidden on purpose. The forest workers told their boss about the find because they knew the notebook had detailed notes and maps. Their boss then called the county sheriff's office. The notebook was proven to belong to Dalton Merriweather by comparing it to university records and finding his name written on the inside cover. Even though it had been 9 years, the discovery brought up the question of where he went missing again. A detective named Lawrence Whitt, who was new to the department and was interested in cold cases, read the original report and asked for permission to look at the recovered materials in more detail. Detective Hewitt would not stop thinking about what he read in those pages for several months, and it would lead him down investigation paths that led him to ask to be given different tasks. The case file he put together rests in the basement records room of the Stone County Courthouse. It was officially closed, but it was eventually archived with the note that there wasn't enough evidence. The field notebook starts off in the usual way. Merriweather's first entries describe his arrival in Stone County, his first interactions with locals, and his excitement about the area's potential for important geological discoveries. His handwriting is clear and organized, which shows that he has gone to school. He talks about the scenery in codes and acronyms, the direction of the dip and strike of limestone layers, the presence of CH nodules, and the formation of sinkholes through processes of dissolution. Christmas Weather writes about his first full day working from the Varnell property on June 19, 1959. He talks about hiking northeast from the homestead along a ridgeal line and making notes of a few small sinkholes. He says that the Varnells are friendly and quiet, and that Garnet Varnell seems awkward around him, often watching from afar but never coming close. I'm talking. In the entry for June 21st, he first talks about what would become his main focus. Merriweather talks about hiking about 2 miles east of the Varnell property into a section of forest that he calls unusually dense. He says that the canopy blocks a lot of sunlight, making it always dark, even in the middle of the day. In a narrow hollow, he finds what he thinks is an old well at first. The building is round and made of stacked limestone blocks that were put together without mortar, which is a method he came up with. Notes as being in line with building methods common in the area in the early 1800s. The opening has a diameter of about 4 feet and is partly hidden by overgrown plants. He drops a stone to see how deep it is, but all he hears are a series of faint echoes that point to a lot of depth. What surprises Merriweather about the well is where it is and how it is. It is in the middle of a dense forest, far from any signs of people living nearby. There are no foundation stones, no cleared land, and no sign of the homestead that would have made sense to go with that kind of building. Also, the well doesn't show any of the weather damage that you would expect after decades of being outside. The stones stay in place tightly, very level on the top rim. That night, Merriweather tells Hiram Varnell about the find and asks him if he knows anything about old settlements in the area. The notebook says that Varnell's answer was short and discouraging. He said the forest to the east was a wild area, never homesteaded as far as he knew, and he told Merriweather to do his research somewhere else. When asked about the well, Varnell is said to have only said that some things in the woods should be left alone, which Merriweather says was a response based on local superstition. Over the next week, Merriweather goes back to the well many times. As he tries to figure out how it works and what it's for, his entries get more and more technical. Using a weighted line, he measures the inside diameter at different depths, finding that the shaft goes down at least 150 feet, which is a lot deeper than a normal water well. Even stranger, the shaft doesn't seem to be going straight down. Instead, it seems to be angled a bit, which is not how wells are usually built. When June 28th comes around, Merriweather's notes sound different. He writes that when he looked into the well in the afternoon, he saw what looked like marks on some of the stones inside that he could see when he pointed his flashlight downward. The marks looked like carved letters or symbols, though they are very worn. He thinks about using rope to try to go down partway into the well and look at these markings more closely. In the same entry, it talks about meeting Garnet Varnell. Merriweather says that he saw Garnet standing at the edge of the clearing, close to the well, and just watching. Garnet spoke when Merriweather came closer. It was one of the few times he had done so. The notebook says that Garnet said they sealed it for a reason. Papa told Garnet, "Never go near it." When asked what he meant, Garnet wouldn't say. He didn't say much more than that his father had told him not to go to that part of the forest. Merriweather was so upset by what happened that he went back to the farm earlier than usual that day. He says that the Varnells seemed tense during dinner, but they didn't say anything about the well. The notebook says that Hiram Varnell talked to Merriweather more honestly than he had before after dinner. Varnell said that his grandfather had talked about the well and called it a settlers who lived in the area for a short time in the 1830s dug a sealed shaft. According to the family story, those settlers suddenly left the area, and other families who tried to settle down nearby only stayed for a short time before leaving too. Varnell said that people in the area thought it was best to stay away from the eastern forest, but he said this was just a silly myth that came from being alone and having a hard time. Even though Varnell seemed uncomfortable with the subject, Merriweather asked if any written records about the first people who came to the area. Varnell said that his grandfather had a family Bible that had notes written in the margins, but he wasn't sure if it still existed. He said he would look in an old trunk in the attic. The next day, on June 29th, Merriweather's entry is short. He writes that he went to the county courthouse in Mountain View, which is the county seat, in the morning to look up property records. He says that the records are not well organized and are missing some information. In the years before 1850, he couldn't find any solid information about how people settled in the area where the well is. When he got back to the Varnell house that afternoon, Hiram was already there with an old leather-bound Bible and a separate sheath of yellowed papers. Varnell said that these papers were hidden inside the Bible. It looked like they were torn pages from a personal journal or diary that were written in a small, faded hand. Varnell let Meriwether look at them but asked that they not be taken off, away from the property. Parts of these pages were typed up by Meriwether and kept in his notebook. Based on the writing and language, they are likely from around the middle of the 9th century. The author isn't named, but the piece sounds like it was written by a settler or traveler passing through the area. The entries are broken up and can be hard to understand at times. It says in one place, "Found the families gone, all 7 dwellings empty. Doors standing open, belongings scattered as if left quickly. The well in the hollow show sign of recent. Work, stones were just put around the opening, but no one would talk about it. Micah wouldn't go near it. They said the ground felt bad. This is what I told him. Fear turns good men into cowards, but I admit my own unease. I'm having trouble with the sealed shaft. Why build something so big and then seal it up right away? Fitted with skill, the stones don't have any gaps, but I can't figure out what they're for. Families in the area whisper in the dark to warn others not to bother them. When I asked for explanation, they either stayed quiet or said they didn't know. One last readable passage. I've heard sounds from the forest for 3 nights now. The sound is low and almost rhythmic. Some say they haven't heard anything. Say I make things up. It's possible that they are right. The mountain's isolation changes how we see things. Still, I'm sure the sound comes from the direction of that sealed shaft. Tomorrow, I'm leaving for a friendlier country. According to Meriwether's notes, he talked about these fragments with for a long time that night. Hiram Varnell. Varnell said again that he thought the well was just an abandoned building from a failed attempt to settle down, and that the dramatic language showed how superstitious people were back then. He told Meriwether that he should take pictures of the well's structure for his research, but he also told him again not to try to go down into it because it was dangerous. The writing for June 30th shows a change in the tone of Meriwether's observations. He says in his writing that he went back to the well site. I came by myself and got there around noon. He brought a rope and climbing gear because he planned to go down part way to get a better look at the markings inside. He saw something he had never seen before as he was getting his gear ready. There was a narrow, overgrown path that led deeper into the forest away from the well site. Meriwether followed this path for about a quarter mile and found the remains of what he calls stone foundations set up in a rough half-circle. He saw 7 different foundations. Outline of a small house, each one resembling one of the 7 houses mentioned in the journal fragments. The buildings were gone for a long time, but the stone bases were still there, mostly buried under forest debris. He looked around the area and found more artifacts, like broken pottery, a rusted iron hinge, and what looked like pieces of barrel hoops. He also noticed that the trees growing near the old settlement looked short compared to the trees in the forest around it, and their trunks were twisted in strange ways. He thought this might be because of poor soil conditions, or the way the land was cleared in the past, but he found the pattern interesting enough to draw. The most important thing he found was what he thought was a cemetery on the edge of the old settlement. Several depressions in the ground pointed to possible grave sites, and he found 2 stone markers that were both broken and partly buried. Even though the writing was badly worn down, he was able to read part of one of them. This is 1837. May God keep us safe from the rest, was a possibility. By early afternoon, Meriwether had returned to the well site and, despite Varnell's warnings, was getting ready to go down. He got down into the shaft by tying a rope around a strong oak tree and pulling himself down. In his notebook, he wrote in great detail about what he saw on this descent. The stones in the upper part of the well were carefully chosen and put together, showing that the work was done by skilled masons. But as he went down, the quality of the construction seemed to change. The stones were below about 20 feet, showed signs of being put in quickly, with bigger gaps and less precise fitting. He said this made it look like the lower part had been finished quickly, maybe out of a sense of urgency. At a depth of about 30 feet, he stopped to look at marks he had seen from above. When looked at up close, these looked like they were carved symbols on purpose instead of random wear. 2 or 3 of them were drawn in his notebook. The symbols are made up of lines and circles that cross each other, but they don't seem to mean anything. He pointed out that they didn't look like any. He didn't know any Native American petroglyphs or typical settler markings. Even worse for him was the temperature. Instead of getting cooler as he went down, as he would have thought, the air seemed to get warmer and had a smell he couldn't quite put his finger on. He said it was like wet stone with an organic part, like dead plants breaking down, but not exactly either of those things. He heard a sound from below when he was about 40 feet up. He says it sounds like a faint echo or reverberation, but he had. He didn't drop anything or make any noise. It looked like the echo came from deep inside the shaft, like something down there had moved or settled. He was scared enough by this to decide to stop his descent and go back to the surface. Merriweather writes that when he came out, he felt physically uneasy and had mild vertigo and a constant ringing in his ears. He thought this was because of the small space and the effort, but the feeling lasted for hours. He put his gear away and went back to the Varnell homestead, getting there as night fell. At the end of his entry, he writes that Hiram Varnell asked how the day's research had gone and looked upset when Merriweather said that they were going to go down into the well. Varnell made it clear that Merriweather shouldn't go back to that place. When asked why, Varnell wouldn't say more at first. He only said it was dangerous, and Merriweather was upsetting something that should have been left alone. The list for July 1st, 1959, is the longest and most in-depth note in the notebook. Also, Merriweather would write this as her last story. At the start, he says that he didn't sleep well and had disturbingly vivid thoughts instead of normal dreams. Even though Varnell warned him not to, he felt compelled to go back to the well site. He says that this drive is intellectual curiosity and that he needs to properly record and understand the structure before he can finish his research in the area. He left the Varnell property by himself at dawn without telling anyone, the family of where he was going. He came with his field gear, extra rope, and a lantern. He also brought a small camera because he wanted to take pictures of the markings inside, even though the lighting was bad. When Merriweather got to the well, he writes that he felt very hesitant to go near it. He calls this irrational worry and points out that it was now daylight and the conditions were perfect for research. But he was still unsure as he stood at the tree line and looked at the well site a few minutes before they get there. He says that the clearing looks different in some way, but he doesn't say what that change is. It looks like there is more vegetation and deeper shadows. Because he is nervous, he thinks this is more of a perception than a real thing. He keeps working on his paperwork by taking pictures of the outside of the wells and writing down exact measurements. In the middle of the morning, he went down into the well again, but this time he wanted to go deeper. He had set up a safer system of ropes and brought the lantern to make things easier to see. He wrote a very detailed account of the descent in his notes. Below 40 feet, where he had stopped the day before, the shaft changes in a very interesting way. The careful stonework gives way to rougher stonework, and then to parts that look like they formed naturally in the cave with only minor changes. At about 60 feet, the shaft's angle goes up, making the slope more noticeable. At 70 feet, he came to a ledge, which was really just a wider part of the shaft that let him rest. He could see from this spot that the shaft went down further, but the rope he brought would not let him go any further. At this depth, the sound had him the most upset. He says there was a clear but faint resonance, like wind moving through a faraway passage, but he didn't feel any airflow. What was even scarier was that this sound seemed rhythmic, almost like a pattern. He wasn't sure if this was real or if his mind was adding order to what was just noise. He also said that it was noticeable that it was much warmer than the cool for this depth. It felt warm to touch the stone. From a geological point of view, this physical oddity bothered him because there was no logical reason for this warmth at this depth and location. He found something on the ledge that shocked him so much that he wrote it down in big letters. There were marks in the dust from feet. He says that these prints look new, maybe just a few days or weeks old instead of years old. They were only partial impressions, smudged and fuzzy, but they were definitely made by people. Feet or shoes. The prints pointed to where the shaft continued to go down, which made it seem like someone had already gone down past this point. The implications made him very upset. If someone had just come down, the rope he was using would have shown signs of being used before. There was no other rope to be seen. It didn't seem likely that someone had come down through a different entrance, if there was one. He couldn't think of a reason why someone would go this far into what looked like an empty cave, a structure that is sealed. Merriweather writes that he looked down with his lantern to see where the shaft continued from the ledge. He could see that it went on, with the walls getting rougher and more like caves. He thought there was at least 50 feet more of depth, and maybe even more. From below, the warm, garden-like smell got stronger. At this point, Merriweather made a choice that he would later say was bad. He writes, "I should ascend now. My instinct tells me to go back to the surface, but I can't give up on this. I will try to go down to the next ledge, write down what I find, and then come back right away." What happens next is rushed and less organized. He tied a second rope to the ledge and went down about 20 feet more. Here, the shaft opened into a wider chamber, which looked like a natural cave formation that the shaft had crossed. His lantern showed a room about 15 feet across with rough walls and a floor that sloped down. The floor showed clear signs of being broken. Merriweather writes that he found things that were arranged on purpose, like big stones arranged in a circle, pieces of what could have been wooden containers or tools, and most unsettling, what looked like personal items like bits of cloth, a broken comb, and a child's shoe. He writes with a lot of anxiety. This chamber was lived in or used for some reason. The arrangement suggests that it was planned, but by whom and when? The seal above has been there for decades. How did these things get there? He moved to the far end of the chamber, where the floor dropped into a passage, and stopped there to write. I can hear the sound I heard from above clearly now. It's not wind or geological settling. It's rhythmic and deliberate, and it comes from the passage ahead. I can't figure out where it comes from, but it makes my chest feel pressured or vibrated. I don't want to go any further, but I need to understand. The entry ends suddenly in the middle of a sentence, and the next page of the notebook is blank. The next few pages have notes written in a different, less consistent hand. These pages are hard to read because they have observations that aren't put together well, symbols that look like the ones he wrote on the shaft walls, and repeated references to the depth and those who stay below. One passage that can be read says, "Cannot determine passage of time." Here, light is used up. The chamber is much bigger than what was first seen. The arrangement is not a mistake. It was planned. They knew. The families were aware. That's why they sealed it. But sealing doesn't get rid of something. Some things stay even when people don't want them to. Another thing, the sound has meaning. I get that now. It's a form of communication. though not language as it was made by people living on the surface. It speaks of a long time of waiting and being patient. How long have they been waiting? Since the sealing, since before. The last pages of the notebook only have sketches. They're rough but obsessive, showing different versions of a circular or spiral pattern. Notes: the arrangement in the lower chamber and the repeated pattern suggest that the whole area was designed on purpose. The last page has a single sentence written in Merriweather's handwriting, which is much more controlled than the earlier messy entries. I was wrong to come here. Hiram tried to warn me. Some discoveries bring knowledge that cannot be unlearned. I will try to get back to the surface now. If I fail, this record may help others understand, or at least avoid my mistake. Second try. My strength has gone down, and the passage I descended isn't the same as I remember it. The chamber has changed, or maybe I'm lost. We'll try a different route. If anyone finds this, the well must stay sealed. Do not try to open it or go down. The depth holds things that the surface can't hold. Bury. These are the last words in Dalton Merriweather's field notebook. The things that were found with it included the. Merriweather had marked up topographical maps that showed exactly where the well was, as well as several letters he had written but never sent to his academic advisor, in which he talked about his research progress in typical upbeat ways before he found the well. Detective Hewitt's investigation file shows how he tried to figure out what happened. He went to the now-abandoned Varnell property and used Merriweather's marked-up maps to find the well site with the help of a local guide. According to his report, the well was found exactly as he described it, a circular stone structure that was heavily overgrown but still whole, with flat stones that had been placed on purpose to seal the top. Who had arranged for part of the seal to be removed so that the inside of the shaft could be studied. 3 experienced cave explorers agreed to go on the expedition, which took place over 2 days in September 1968 and used modern climbing gear and communication tools. The explorers confirmed Merriweather's account. Well-built masonry gave way to rougher work further down the shaft. They went down about 100 feet and confirmed that there was a natural cave chamber next to the shaft. The chamber showed signs of previous human presence, including pieces of unidentified organic material and worn areas on the floor that suggested heavy foot traffic. What they did not find, however, was any evidence of Merriweather himself. There were no remains or equipment other than a single severed rope. What worried the exploration team more was that they heard sounds in the deeper chamber that couldn't be explained by normal geological processes. These included low-frequency vibrations, echoes that seemed to come from below instead of reflecting from above, and what one explorer called almost rhythmic patterns in the background noise that made them feel uncomfortable. The team went down to about 130 feet, where the chamber floor lowered. They went down a narrow water-carved passage and said they felt very uneasy. They smelled something similar to Merriweather's description, and the passage seemed to go deeper into large cave systems, but they didn't have the right gear to keep exploring, and were getting more and more uncomfortable, so they decided to stop and go back to the surface. In his report, the team leader, an experienced cave explorer named Douglas Renfroot, wrote, "The technical aspects of this. A shaft and chamber system isn't common in cinematography, but it's also not unheard of. But the psychological effects of the environment are harder to put into groups. At a depth that would normally be normal for experienced explorers, all 3 team members felt more and more anxious and lost. We advise against further exploration without a lot of planning and infrastructure to back it up." Opaline Varnell, who had moved to a small town in Missouri with her husband Hiram Varnell, was interviewed by Detective Hewitt after the death of her husband. When we talked to her, she was 71 years old and living with a niece. According to Hewitt's notes, she didn't want to talk about Merriweather or what happened in 1959 at first. In the end, she gave a statement that had information that wasn't in the original investigation in 1959. She confirmed that Merriweather had stayed with them and was becoming more and more interested in the well site. She said that Hiram was worried about the researcher's behavior because he was. After his first trip down the well, he didn't seem like himself. Opaline got angry when she was asked directly about Merriweather's departure on July 2nd. She told them that Merriweather had not left on their own on that date. Instead, he hadn't come back to the farm on the evening of July 1st. The next morning, Hiram and Garnet went looking for him and found his base camp near the well site, which had been left empty but with his things still there. Opaline said that Hiram had gone down into the well to look for Merriweather, but he came back within an hour. He told Opaline that the researcher was gone and that he had not found any sign of him below. He also told her that they needed to seal the well again right away. He and Garnet worked hard all day to put stones across the opening of the well, which Opaline described as being very urgent. When asked why they hadn't told the police the truth about Merriweather's disappearance, Helene said that Hiram was afraid they would be accused of foul play. Have fun. She added in a low voice that he also didn't want anyone else to go down that well. She said he thought Merriweather had gone too far into parts of the cave system that no one should go, and that making more noise there would only cause more trouble. Opaline also said that Hiram's health got worse after July 1959. He got very anxious, had trouble sleeping, and started to withdraw more and more. He talked about hearing sounds from the forest from time to time, mostly at night, said to be calling. His death certificate says he died of heart failure in 1964. Opaline thought that his decline was more mental than physical, though. It was not possible to talk to Garnet Farnell. Official records show that he died in 1961 in a facility in Little Rock, where he had been sent after acting more and more strangely after his brother died. Records from the hospital showed that the person had paranoid episodes, insisted that something was coming up from below and hurt themselves. An attempt. It was written that complications from pneumonia were the cause of death. Detective Hewitt's investigation ended with a strange suggestion. He suggested that the well be permanently sealed with concrete, that the spot be marked on geological survey maps with a note saying not to dig there, and that the case file should have a note about how scary the site is for people's mental health. His bosses didn't follow these suggestions because they thought they were too strong. A note was added to close the case file. Of accidental death, and Dalton Merriweather's body has not been found yet. The well site was sealed off with the stone caps. Nothing else was done by the government. However, Hewitt's personal notes, which were found among his papers after he retired in 1983, show that he was still interested in the case. He kept looking into the history of the area and tried to find the early settlers who had sealed the well in the first place. He found scattered references to families who had lived there for a short time in church records and old newspapers. People mostly came from Tennessee and Kentucky in the 1830s to find farmland in the area. Within 2 years of moving there, these families left their settlement, leaving behind built homes and cleared fields. Reports from the time say that the migration happened quickly, with people leaving in the middle of the growing season. An economically illogical choice that points to a pressing reason. A circuit preacher who went to the area in 1838 wrote in a letter that the families talked about a disturbance in the ground of sounds from below that kept them from sleeping and made them feel scared, but they couldn't or wouldn't say what was bothering them. Hewitt also found evidence that the area had been inhabited even earlier. Ethnographers who studied Native American oral histories in the early 20th century found references to a place in that area that was thought to be spiritually dangerous. This place was thought to be where the underworld meets the surface, and there were rules about how to stay away from it. Were observed as customary. Hewitt's last notes on the case, from 1982, said, "I have spent more time on this matter than professional duty requires. I have done so because I want to know what happened to Dalton Merriweather and why the site has such deep psychological effects on those who explore it. The logical explanation is clear enough. A researcher went too far into an unstable cave system and got lost or hurt in passages that are too complicated to map. The sealed well is just an old structure whose purpose in being built has been obscured by time and incomplete records. The reported psychological effects are due to isolation, expectation, and the human tendency to find patterns in random events. This explanation fits the rules, but it doesn't satisfy me. I have read Merriweather's notebook dozens of times and seen how his written observations got worse as he went from professional documentation to personal notes. He said that the experience deeply changed his mental state, and that the effects were the same for different visitors to the site, even though they visited decades apart. This is statistically significant. I have to conclude that the site has geological, acoustic, or atmospheric properties that affect human psychology in measurable ways. I can't say for sure if these properties are natural, or if they were improved or created by humans. Future researchers will approach this site with the right amount of care and support infrastructure. Over the next few years, the well site was visited by a number of researchers and people interested in the story of Merriweather's disappearance. Most of them found it to be exactly what was described: an overgrown stone structure that was sealed and not interesting at all. A few people did report feeling uneasy or hearing strange sounds, but these reports were never officially looked into. In 1995, the area was bought by the United States Forest Service as part of an expanded wilderness preserve. The well site is now in a wilderness area where heavy machinery and extensive digging are not allowed. Forest Service maps mark the location with a note indicating a historical structure and warning of possible shaft hazards. Dalton Merriweather's official fate is still unknown, but his name is on a memorial at the University of Missouri, honoring researchers who died in the university's geological library keeps his research papers and the recovered field notebook as special collections that other researchers can use upon request. The case got some new attention in the early 2000s when a graduate student interested in historical missing person cases wrote a thesis that included an analysis of Merriweather's disappearance. The student, a young woman named Cordelia Voss, spent the summer following Merriweather's research, visiting the places he had been researching and writing about them. Ozarks site and talking to older residents who remembered the Varnell family. Voss's thesis said that Merriweather probably died in a cave-in or got lost in the complicated cave system and died from exposure or injury. She blamed confirmation bias for the psychological aspects of the case, saying that people who visited the site knowing about Merriweather's disturbing notebook entries were more likely to feel anxious and see normal cave acoustics as strange. There is an addendum to her thesis that was added a few months after the main text was finished. It says that she had persistent anxiety and trouble sleeping for weeks after visiting the site. She also said that the exploration was psychologically challenging in ways that previous cave explorations had not been. She suggested that the site be studied by researchers with experience in environmental psychology and acoustics. The well in Ozark Hollow is still sealed. Few people make the difficult hike to get there, and what they find is mostly a circle of worn-out stones surrounded by dense second-growth forest that has taken over the space where buildings used to be. However, every once in a while, hikers who go into that area report hearing strange sounds, feeling unfounded anxiety, or having the impression that the forest there is different from other forests nearby. These reports are filed and looked into. People tend to forget about things that happened far away and believe in the power of suggestion. There has been no formal investigation since Detective Hewitt's work in 1968. The materials are still in archives and can be accessed, but they are rarely used. The story of Dalton Merriweather has become a minor footnote in books about geological research accidents and the dangers of working alone in remote areas and caving. What really happened in that shaft in July 1959 can only be. People have thought about whether Merriweather died of natural causes, whether the psychological stress of being alone and confined in that environment led to disorientation and tragic error, or whether there is some property of that location that has not been measured or explained. The answer lies below, where no light has fully penetrated. The sealed well stands as a memorial to people who were too curious and asked questions that maybe shouldn't have been asked. Mountains hide many secrets in their limestone bones and the dark tunnels that run through the ground below their forested slopes. Some of those secrets are protected by more than just stone and darkness. Merriweather's notebook is still in a small archive box in the basement of the Stone County Courthouse. The pages are yellowed even more from years of use, and his precise handwriting is breaking down into those last few scrawled scrolls. Anyone who wants to read it can, but not many people ever do. The maps are still there. It also shows the exact location of the well for anyone who wants to find it. And far below, in passages that aren't lit by light and chambers that reverberate with sounds that could be water and stone or something else entirely. The depth keeps going, patient and enduring. It waits under the seal, beneath the stone, and beneath the weight of earth and time. No living thing can say if it's waiting for something or just existing in its own strange persistence. The forest is quiet about it, and the stones keep their cool. The darkness keeps its secrets close, and the early settlers who were smart enough to hide what they had found only left behind warnings written quickly and sealed in books, buried in the margins, lost to time. Maybe this silence is wisdom. Maybe some knowledge should stay buried. Maybe the depth should stay unexplored, not because there is nothing there, but because what is there is best left to its darkness, surrounded by layers of. People who are interested in these things still whisper about the traveler who found the well that shouldn't have been there. The story is used as a warning about doing research alone in remote areas, about how important it is to follow safety rules, and about the mental challenges of being alone. But for those who have stood at that site, gone even partially down that shaft, felt the strange warmth, and heard the sounds that don't quite fade into silence, for those people, the story has a different meaning. It's not so much a sad story as a reminder that there are depths we haven't fully explored beneath the surface of our well-mapped and measured world. And maybe for good reason.